The headlines have already moved on. Maduro is in New York. The aircraft have returned. The official statements have been issued, but the real story is only beginning. What unfolded in Venezuela was never a legal matter. It was not primarily about crime, or morality. It was a demonstration of how global systems function when pressure reaches its breaking point. To understand it, you have to step past the spectacle and examine the structure beneath it. Not personalities, not political camps, but organization, incentives, and power. This operation, presented as law enforcement, fits neatly into a much larger framework involving energy resources, shipping corridors, and the financial systems that decide who holds influence in the modern world. For years, pressure built quietly. Sanctions tightened, banking access narrowed, energy markets shifted. China expanded its economic footprint across South America. Venezuela did not suddenly become important. It became impossible to ignore. What appears abrupt is actually the final move in a long chain of events. A point where negotiation failed, leverage ran out, and force replaced diplomacy. This report is not about what happened, but why it happened now, not earlier. Why oil pricing, currency systems, and China's presence in the region sit at the center of this decision, even as official explanations keep changing. And why what is not said matters more than what is. On every channel, the same images repeat. Special forces descending from aircraft, a Latin American leader detained. Analysts praising the precision of the operation. The focus stays on the spectacle, because when your attention is fixed on the aircraft, you are not watching the money. This was not about democracy. It was not about human rights. It was not about narcotics networks. It was debt collection. And first with military power. There is an old rule in global politics that governments prefer to ignore. You cannot permanently restrict nations that control resources you depend on, not without consequences, not without eventually paying a price. For 23 years, the United States tried to defy that rule in Venezuela. Sanctions, asset freezes, recognition of alternative governments, funding opposition groups. Every method short of direct force was used, until this week, when all of it collapsed at once. On December 28th, Nicolás Maduro signed energy agreements with China worth $18 billion. 2 days later, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan quietly requested talks with Venezuelan officials in Panama. Not threats, not ultimatums. Access to oil Washington had spent 2 decades trying to isolate. That was not diplomacy. That was surrender. Interrupted. For years, Americans were told a comforting story. That shale made the United States energy independent. That being the world's largest producer meant freedom from Middle Eastern and Latin American oil. This is partially true. And in geopolitics, partial truth is often worse than a lie. The United States produces enormous volumes of oil, but primarily light, sweet crude, expensive to extract, high quality, and poorly suited for the country's own infrastructure. The massive refineries in Texas and Louisiana, built half a century ago, were designed for heavy sour crude. The thick, tar-like oil found in Venezuela and parts of the Middle East. America produces fine wine. Its machines run on diesel. For decades, Saudi Arabia filled that gap. That relationship is now effectively over. Riyadh is cutting output to keep prices high. It is aligning with BRICS. It no longer responds to Washington's expectations. The Saudi leadership has made one thing clear: dependence is finished. That left Washington with a math problem. Heavy crude supplies were tightening. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, designed for war, not price management, had already been drained. Under the Biden administration alone, 1 million barrels were released in 2022 to stabilize prices after the Ukraine conflict. They were never replaced. Today, the SPR sits at roughly 3 million barrels, the lowest level since 1983. At the same time, the International Energy Agency projects a global shortfall of 1.2 million barrels per day by 2020 if tensions with Iran worsen and Russian supply remains constrained. So the map was studied again. Canada is maxed out. Russia is sanctioned. Saudi Arabia is uncooperative. That leaves one source, the Orinoco Belt, Venezuela. This is not about current production. It is about pricing power. Venezuela holds the largest confirmed oil reserves on Earth, roughly 300 billion barrels. Production collapsed under sanctions, mismanagement, and capital flight. Output fell from over 3 million barrels per day to under 1 million. So why does Venezuela matter if it produces so little? Because control of future supply determines control of future pricing. For 50 years, oil has been priced in U.S. dollars. The petrodollar system created permanent global demand for American currency. Every country needed dollars to buy energy. That demand allowed the U.S. to borrow cheaply, print aggressively, and sustain deficits without immediate consequences. That system is now fracturing. Saudi Arabia let the dollar-only agreement expire in 2024. 4. Oil sales to China are settled in yuan. The UAE conducted $128 billion in yuan-based trade with China. Russia sells to India in rupees. Iran sells to China in yuan. The dollar's share of global reserves fell from 71% in 1999 to 82% in 2020. Each percentage point represents roughly 30 billion less demand for U.S. debt. Venezuela was preparing what financial analysts call a nuclear option, fully integrating its energy sector into China's cross-border interbank payment system and pricing oil in a basket of currencies led by the yuan, backed by gold. If Venezuela succeeded, it would prove that massive resource wealth can exist outside the dollar system and survive. That precedent could not be allowed. China-Latin America trade reached $518 billion in 2024, growing roughly 30% annually. 2 decades ago, China accounted for less than 2% of the region's exports. Today, it is South America's largest trading partner. Brazil, Peru, and Chile trade more with China than with the United States. 22 of 33 regional nations have joined the Belt and Road Initiative. This is not abstract. China operates major ports across Peru, Brazil, Panama, and Ecuador. The new port of Chancay in Peru connects 6 countries directly to Asia, bypassing U.S. controlled supply chain. Meanwhile, Venezuelan oil is already pledged. China prepaid $60 billion between 2007 and 2024. Russia added $16 billion in loans backed by crude. 4 U.S. strategies tried to break this lock. Sanctions, regime change, diplomatic isolation, limited corporate access, all failed. So force was chosen. Tactically, the operation was flawless. Strategically, it may prove catastrophic. Maduro is gone. The system remains. Venezuela is not Panama. It is not Iraq. Power there is distributed across generals, intelligence chiefs, courts, and armed civilian groups. The military is not separate from the economy. It is the economy, and the rest of the world is watching. Every resource-rich country is asking the same question. If we price outside the dollar, are we next? Fear does not build loyalty. It accelerates exit. BRICS pay is already being tested. China's gold reserves are rising rapidly. Alternative to payment systems are expanding. The dollar system is no longer perceived as neutral infrastructure. It is viewed as a weapon. The petrodollar is ending not because of technology or inflation, but because trust has broken. Systems based on force always cost more than systems based on cooperation. The aircraft were only the opening scene. What follows will be slower, more complex, and far harder to control. If you want to understand how power really moves, through energy, money, and systems rather than speeches, subscribe to Financial Origins, where we break down the hidden architecture behind global events before the headlines catch up.